based on a question, or you can also just say to yourself, it asks the kids to apply this standard in a way that is less important than in other ways.
Okay.
And clarify for me what RN 2.2 was doing.
RN 2.2.
What's the point of that standard?
It was main idea. This time it broke it down into each paragraph.
Yeah.
Where we've kind of talked when we kind of ask like whole picture.
Right. We look at the passage. We don't look at each paragraph. Whereas this CFA really zoned in on paragraph 3. What's the main idea of paragraph 3
Okay.
or 2?
So this one broke it completely apart.
Which was part of the conversation when we put the CFAs in, and she and I had talked a little bit that maybe that's where we go in this next set, is looking at breaking them down by paragraph instead of by passage.
Okay.
Maybe that's where we go in our successes.
Which one of these questions then would you want to throw out for the purposes of this particular conversation? And it could be 2.2, 2.1, or it could be 6.2. If we're honing in on 2 or 3 of those questions that would really tell you, and remember, we're asking ourselves, did students acquire essential knowledge and skills, and how do we know?
If we're throwing something out, I would throw out 6.2 because that's all writing stuff.
Okay.
And then look at 2.2 and 2.1.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did 6.2 out of curiosity, did it tell you that kids had acquired essential skills?
Most of the kids got it.
Yeah, they either had it or they
The
didn't.
only thing, I mean, like, we found a contradiction between the Canvas and the written one. We're on George Washington,
Okay.
but that was just a grading issue.
So you would say, based on standard 6.2 right now, that most of your kids, the prominence, the number of kids have mastered that skill,
Yes.
and it's in a critical one?
Capitalization.
Yeah, it shows up.
choosing capitalization.
Yeah,
Okay.
so 1 through 3 is.
All right.
4 through 5, 4 and 5. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
The types of sentences.
Okay, so you guys have really went through your CFAs like amazing already. So let's start with 2.2, and which questions do you want to hone in on?
I think 1, 2, 3, and 4. I mean, 1 through 5. That is just straight main idea, and
Yeah.
I think that they were worded very fairly.
And I would say if we had to narrow them specifically down, looking on my kids, I would say 3, 4, and 5 specifically. And a lot of it has to do with, I think, because it's looking at the type of wording within it. Like 3 says, main idea is that Spanish pioneers. And then when you go back, looking in the paragraph, trying to line up what it is that they did.
Okay.
And I think a lot of that is, I mean, like I said, we teach a lot of the whole skill set, going back in now and narrowing it down, lining it up.
Okay, perfect. Well, then let's look specifically at questions 3, 4, and 5 if everybody's okay with that for the sake of time, nothing else. And then let's just run the protocol that you see here. So you're looking at your individual class data right now, and you are looking at this, and you are then having a conversation as the whole group, because you actually have the whole group right in front of you. You've got everything on there. So what do you see, and I want you to think about this, did students acquire essential knowledge and skills, and how do you know based on the results that you have in 3, 4, 5? And I'll be quiet for, usually that protocol takes a little bit longer, but the first person that talks, make sure that when you talk after, now I'm talking again, in terms of just knowing the protocol, that you begin with a data-based conversation. So based on the results of IC. So it has to be based on data. Okay, what's in front of you? All right, go. are still focusing. Can I push forward? I'm gonna start. I did a quick survey of I just started on question 3, and I looked in terms of the prominence, if the learning gap was observed, and I noticed that there was only maybe one EL student in 3rd grade that got number 3 right. And I thought that was kind of interesting in terms of just looking at the data. So this was a specific question about main idea, right, finding it in a paragraph.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then my question that I would wanna take back in terms of just the observed learning gap or the instructional gap is that true of other data that you have about the EL? And then knowing about main idea, and I know that's different for Kylie because she doesn't have them. And does that mean that one of the focus sessions with Sandra needs to be main idea?
I have most of the ELs in my group.
Oh,
She
yes, you
does.
do.
I
Oh, you do,
do.
okay.
Yeah.
So
most in my
it
group.
becomes a conversation then
Absolutely.
of, I mean, that's a huge glaring piece of information.
And if you, I mean,
Mhm.
when I think about their other pieces of data, like we just did an updated fresh read, every one of them had 80% comprehension or better. And it did, I don't remember if it questioned on main idea or not, off the top of my head, but.
So then my other question becomes,
up.
do they know pioneers? Do they know Native American?
Oh my gosh, so you're going right to this idea of, is it an instructional gap, is it a learning gap, and it might be a learning gap, and so the other conversation that we have to have about those kiddos is their vocabulary.
Right.
Mhm.
So I went on and I went to see out of the total number of students, how many answered those questions correct. I did a total overall, and 17 out of our total class got 3 right, only 8 got 4 right, and only 10 got 5
And see,
right.
I looked at it out of just my class, and I had 8 out of 19 answered 3, 4 out of 19 4, and then 5 out of 19 answered 5. Most of those all being in your group, 1 in your group for question 4. So one of mine was in Dorian, was mine. So
That's, okay, go ahead.
I looked at just 3, 4, 5 as a block, and I scanned down, and 24 of all of our students answered 1 question correct. 8 answered 2 or more correct. Michael's the only one I saw that answered all 3 correct. 31 got 0 correct, or
Yeah.
3, 4, 5.
Holy my goodness. Okay, now, so then let's go back, because you had started a conversation before we went into this protocol about some of the questions and the way that it was addressed in the CFA itself. So we understand and know, in terms of just the protocol that's in front of you for 3, 4, and 5, that the significance is high. I mean, it's main idea,
Right.
okay? How have you been teaching it? Give us some examples of that.
I actually bought a huge thing off of Teachers Pay Teachers, and each day it's something different. The topic is different. So I have it broken down into boxes. So top box is your main idea, and then it gives you 3 off boxes. They're your key details. So we do 1 together and then 1 by themselves. We do it every day, just so we're hitting it every day. We read it together, and then do the first one together. Second one we read together, and then they do it on their own. So that's part of the practice. That just they get it every day. And then with our story, whenever we read like the story in Pearson, we do it in there too.
So having said that, where's the disconnect? So let's get deeper. So how are you teaching it?
So also within the story, we address it within the story of the week, and then within each of our guided reading groups, I have each student read individually, and then we discuss as a whole group what is the main idea of the story, and I make each student tell me what they believe the main idea is. And sometimes it's interesting because while the understanding of the main idea is there, they each tell it in a different way, which I think is a good idea, but sometimes their wording brings out an interesting point that isn't quite right, so you have to dig deeper within those groups to make them see the main idea. I like Kylie's idea of using the paper, which is actually something that I had brought out for this week after seeing this, and the disconnect within it.
Okay. What do you think, Beth? What do you do?
We've been reading passages, and I use a lot of Post-it notes and read it and give me 1 sentence of what this mostly is about. I've also tried to stress, and we look at it, that the first sentence is often going to be the main idea. It introduces and sets up everything. And then in writing, which is not always the same group, we've been talking a lot about main idea and supporting details with our writing. So it should start to reinforce each other, but they really struggle. and it becomes very obvious, a lot of background knowledge that is just missing.
So when we're looking at this sheet, then one of the things that we're talking about that's an instructional gap, and remember, what we're really asking ourselves is, did they acquire the essential knowledge, and how do we know? How can we use that evidence? It sounds like we're also saying that there needs to be a secondary conversation about vocabulary instruction, building background knowledge, in addition to main idea.
Right.
If we are